What kind of baseline do you need if you want to run an ultramarathon this year? Hello there, my friends. Welcome back to the Messy Middle podcast / the doclyssfitness YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be chatting about what you want to look for in your training program as minimums or peaks when it comes to training for your first ultramarathon or 50K, or kind of baselines we want to be striving for in general, or what you can expect out of training for these races and endeavors. When it comes to trail and ultramarathon running, they are having a moment. The sport is booming and it is very trendy. Running is actually having a moment, and I think it's fantastic. But I don't want, with the, me training and sharing and documenting my ultramarathon trainings, as well as the boom of all of this, to have people start jumping into events that they're not quite ready or trained for and not really knowing what to expect from them, and or kind of being in the place within their life where they have the time to give to these things. That doesn't mean that I want you to feel like they're super out of reach, but I want to be realistic about what you should expect or anticipate when training for these races and events. So to cut to the chase, if you were looking to train for a 50K, an ultramarathon, your first ultra, I would say the absolute minimums that you should be meeting in your training program during the peak weeks, which is essentially the highest volume, highest mileage weeks before your taper leading into the race. The absolute minimums that I want to be seeing are probably 6 hours of running per week, at least a 30-mile per week average or baseline, and at least a 15-mile or 3-hour long run. I would say that is like the bare minimum of what you probably need to at least finish an ultramarathon. But more realistically, I would say a range of 35 to 40 miles per week on the lower end, 6 to 8 hours per week total, and maybe more ideally a 16 to 18 up to 20-mile long run is going to be a little bit more appropriate for people, at least for their first ultramarathon, give or take that long run time ranging maybe from 4 to 5 hours of time on feet, give or take the terrain that you're training on. And so this might seem like a lot, and that's because it is. Training for ultramarathons is really hard. It is a lot of work. It's really time demanding. It's similar to that of training for marathons. Honestly, training for a 50K is probably not that much different than the demands of training for a marathon, but we really want to think about how much that's taking out of our week each week. I think that a lot of people try to rush to these goals or rush their timelines, or they want to just ramp up linearly when it comes to these training goals. And something that I want you guys to consider is that when it comes specifically to ultramarathon training, so much fitness and capacity for this sport or for these endeavors is accumulated not in just like single weeks we do in the buildup, but spending a long period of time accumulating miles and volume. If you go back on my YouTube channel or head to my YouTube channel, depending on where you're listening to this at, I have documented my entire return to ultra and my 50-mile training for last year. And then I'm even documenting my 100-mile training this year, depending on when you're listening to this. And you will see that I'm intentionally spending long periods of time building up my mileage and volume and titrating through different phases of base building here in order to kind of maintain this large area under the curve of my training to accumulate a lot of fitness. I think a lot of newer runners will think, okay, well, you're made in those peak weeks or the race prep phase, or you can just spend 8 to 12 weeks kind of tuning up for a race, and that's enough. And you will develop some fitness and kind of, you want to peak and prep in that kind of 6 to 8, maybe 10-week build up, specifically focused on that race peaking and prepping. But you will see in most ultramarathon plans, or if you do mine, or, my approach in general, if you've watched my training, is more so let's get a lot of area under the curve and a good baseline of mileage. So if you are looking to shift towards training for an ultramarathon, I would say having a minimum baseline of 15 to 20 miles per week for maybe the last 8 to 12 weeks is probably a good place to start before kind of building towards that. And I really like then, maybe spending a period of time in that 20 to 30 miles per week phase or range, and then a period of time kind of peaking towards that, the build up to the race, where you'll probably peak around 40, 45, maybe up to 50 miles per week, depending on your fitness, the program you're doing, the volume you're doing, and how fast you are and the train you're on. All those things will dictate kind of how many miles you really accumulate in the week when you're specifically trail running, racing, and training, or counting invert within those things. And so I really think a lot of people come from this baseline of I'm not running at all, or I'm only running 5 or 10 miles a week, but I've ran in the past and I want to run an ultra and I want to do it in 3 months or something like that. And I think we want to be really realistic about our timelines and where we're coming from. So I think, coming from a baseline of 15 to 20 miles per week, giving yourself maybe 4, 5, upwards of 6 months to really tune up and towards that race is kind of a good goal there. I think you should assume that, your race training plan is going to be probably at least 4 months of progression and building up from there, and or up towards of 6. And then if you have a lower fitness, if you're coming from someone who's not running a lot or is only running a little bit here and there, maybe you run a 5K or 10K, giving yourself potentially a good year and a half, or if you've never ran at all, 2 years to really build up to these race distances. I really can't reiterate how much of when we get into all running training in general, all race training, no matter what it is, because the distance and the volume is going to be novel to you and your body. But something I think people severely underestimate when it comes to these higher mileage, higher distance goals, especially ultras, is how shitty it feels in that middle of that training when you're first increasing your volume to a place that you haven't really had it before, especially if you haven't built up to anything like this. This is your first time doing it. And those weeks and phases of when your body's adapting to that new increase or higher level of volume, and not only your weekly mileage, but even your long run. So the first time you run a 13 or a 15 or a 16 mile long run, it feels horrific. But every time you do that, more and more as you gain experience, as you keep doing it, it does start to feel easier. And so I'm a big fan of building in room and space to keep repeating average weekly volumes or long runs over the course of a training cycle before we really peak and push and hit that higher mileage towards the end, those bigger long runs, those preparatory phase type race peak specifics training, and get used to running in that 13 to 15, 16 mile range for a lot of long runs. I think that is something that people severely underestimate, is the jump of going from half marathon distance long runs up to 15, 16 mile long runs up to then that, 16 to 18, then that 18 to 20. Every one of those jumps when you first start training for an ultra marathon feel really hard, and they feel really big, and they feel like, holy shit, this is the most terrible thing I've ever done. This feels impossible, until you kind of repeat them and keep doing them over and over again as part of your training cycle. So think about not just this linear buildup over time, but accumulating volume or long runs and or that area under the curve for an extended period of time leading into that race. Now, this doesn't mean you have to be in ultra peaking shape for 6 months to a year, but think about building up to that or having periods of time where you're really maintaining that and developing and building fitness there and letting your body adapt and get used to that. That's something I think a lot of people underestimate. And so, not everyone wants to dedicate this amount of time. They just want to finish it. They want to have a goal. And if that is the goal, I would still encourage you to take a slower, longer build than you think, so your body can adapt to that, so you can actually have an enjoyable time on that race day. But also then, wrapping back to what I was saying in the beginning, is being realistic about what it takes to run these races and goals. If you don't want to dedicate 6 to 8 hours a week of running on top of lifting in your work and child or pet or, home responsibilities or whatever that is, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with saying that an ultra marathon isn't for you, and you're not any less of a runner if you don't run an ultra or even a marathon. You recognize that you can still be part of the trail running or running community in general by doing shorter distance races. I think in general, the trail running community definitely overemphasizes the ultras. The 50K feels like the 5K compared to some of the other distances out there and these big, audacious, amazing goals. There's nothing wrong with doing shorter distance trail races or meeting yourself where you're at, or honestly, I really recommend starting with those. There's a lot of people who just jump to the ultra distances, and that's fine. But if you are someone who maybe has less of a running history or is feeling a little bit unconfident or unsure or not sure about the training volume and the demands or the adaptation it takes to that, run a trail half or a trail 25K first and see how that feels. And what's funny is that's what I did. I ran a trail half marathon and a 25K, and then I did my first 50K. And when I first started trail running, everything was so hard. Everything felt so hard all the time. Everything felt like you were just fighting your runs. And now, after years of doing it, or time or exposure or getting used to it, things that used to feel so impossibly hard feel so much more realistic and easy, or are baseline or maintenance. And that's the goal over time when gaining fitness, whether it's hybrid training or running training in general, is to raise the floor of what you can maintain. And you want to think about doing that, building up your floor of what you can handle in your training before peaking and refining and going into that race of what you're aiming for in your goal. And so So, I don't want to discourage anyone from running an ultra. If you want to do that, I highly encourage you to do it. Trail running is so magical. I'm very pro that, but I also am very I'm a compassionate and honest coach and individual when it comes to these things. And I want to see people ramping up and training to these goals intelligently and making sure they're taking appropriate timelines for what that goal entails. So either preparing for a decent base build phase before going into a peak and prep for that race, or easing into the mileage needed, or having kind of that tough love conversation with yourself of what does it actually entail to run these things and what is it required. So, reiterating the minimums, I think you should aim for at the very least 30 miles per week, at the very least a 15-mile or 3-hour long run, and at the very least maybe 6 hours a week of running, give or take, where that all fall in lines with each other, and more realistically looking at like that 6 to 8 hour range of running and or a 30 to 40, maybe up to 45, 50 mile per week peak, and maybe more ideally a 16 to 18 as a more moderate goal for a long run, up to kind of an 18 to 20. I don't necessarily think you have to have a greater than 20 mile per week long run in order to train for these races, but you probably are going to want to aim for something that's like 4 to 5 hours of feet, depending on the miles and the vert that you're getting in, and using that more so as a way to practice feeding and nutrition and pacing and how you feel out there. So much of ultra training isn't just gaining fitness in these long runs. You're not actually really gaining that much fitness in your long runs probably after a certain point in time, but rather you're just getting used to being on your feet, moving for hours, eating, pacing yourself, your gear, your nutrition strategy. That is so important, and that's part of it. And that itself takes so much trial and error over the course of your training. And you want to make sure you build that into your training, and you factor in the fact that, long runs are going to suck. You're going to have to bail on them. You're going to, miss weeks of training or long runs because life happens, or your nutrition strategy is going to need refined, or you're going to have to work on bonking or your pre-run nutrition. Like, factor all this in, because all those little things that we kind of neglect in shorter distance running, when you are out there in an ultra marathon, can make and break your day. The blisters, the gear, the nutrition, the little things that we kind of can brush to the side and get away with in shorter races all get magnified in these ultra marathons, where it's not even your running fitness that are necessarily making and breaking your day as much it is pacing, knowing when to hike versus run, knowing how to fuel yourself so you don't bonk and you keep going, how to dig out of those low lows, how to pace uphill versus downhill, making sure that your gear doesn't chafe you or blister you. Like, all of this stuff in trail and ultra running can become very big deals when you're in the middle of the race. So you want to make sure you work through all those kinks and or obstacles in your training. But I also want to make sure that, despite this, that you guys are being realistic and honest with yourselves, with your fitness and where you're at, and that ultras are big deals. I know everyone's running a 50K and it's blowing up right now, but respect the distance, do the training that's needed. It's okay to say, I am not in a place to do this training right now. It's okay to say this isn't for me. And it's okay to say, you know what, this is a goal that I have long term, but right now it's not the season for me to be able to handle this and focus it. Just like it's also okay to say, you know what, I want this goal and I'm going to do what it takes to get to it, even if it kind of sucks and even if life's a little bit crazy, I'm going to make it work for me. Those things are also okay too. I'd be a hypocrite if I said I didn't take that approach with a lot of my ultra trail and running training in my PhD. But I also took a big break there at the end intentionally because I just couldn't keep up with what it required to do, what you need to do to participate in the sport. And as someone who's returned to ultra last year, I just, I'm recording this a week and a half after running a 50K, and I'm training for my first 100 miler. I've run races on a variety of mileage and training, fitness, and, timelines. And I will say that the years that I have the best races and the best fitness and the best time and the best everything are the ones where I give myself time to build up for that race and running goal. And I think that the clients that have the most success as well are those that really build in those step timelines, or take appropriate timeline builds to the goals that they have, or come in with a larger base of fitness to refine from or build on before going into these bigger goals. So you just need to be honest with yourself. If you want more on this, I have an older podcast actually from 2020, the year that I ran my first 100K. called So You Want to Run an Ultra. I would go back and listen to that as well. There's definitely a lot of valuable insight there on like picking your race and what to do and how to get started. But I kind of wanted to go today into a quick little chit chat with you about the realities of training for an ultramarathon, what it takes, being honest about our timelines and minimums of which I think we should be striving for. Again, give or take, it's not perfect. Some people do rush their timelines and some people just jump into mileage and some people's bodies can handle that. And if you're one of those people, that's great. Recognize that within yourself. But if you're not, make sure, if you're a mere mortal like the rest of us, making sure that you're being honest with yourself and the timelines that you have, any injuries you're bringing into it, any training history you're bringing into it, and or lack thereof, and what it's going to take to get you from where you're at now to the goal that you have. It doesn't mean you can't do it. I 100% believe everyone here listening to this podcast can do that, or whatever big audacious goal they have set for themselves. I'm sure at this point in time, nobody who doesn't have the interest in running a trail or ultramarathon is listening. It's just about being smart and practical and meeting yourself where you're at and being honest about the timeline of what it's going to take to get you from where you're at now to the goal that you want to be. So if you need help with this, reach out to us. In the LYSS method, we have at this point in time, I think we have over 27 running programs, and we can help you build a timeline to get you from where you're at, even if you're not running at all, to an ultramarathon or a trail race of your goals, or help you kind of figure out your timeline if you have been running on what it would take for you to get to your goals. And something that we don't advertise enough because it's hard to explain is that if you have a kind of weird timeline or weird race timeline goals or a fitness status versus date and you don't know how to build our programs out to get there, sign up for the app and reach out to us because we will personally build out your timeline of programs for you and say, hey, let's start in this program, run it for this many weeks, link it together to this program, then we'll merge into this race training program here and get you to your race goal on this date. And we will help you personally work through that as well. So have no fear. If you need help in that specifically, me and my team can help you. If you want to get to your goals and train with the LYSS method, we will link all of my programs here below. But otherwise, just be honest with yourself and what it's going to take to get to that goal, if it's the right time for you to do that, and or if you just need more time to get there. But I hope that helps. I hope that kind of gives you a little bit more context of what it's going to take and require to reach these goals. A little bit tough love kind of coaching chat with you all here today. And if you found this helpful, if you're on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, like, subscribe, comment, rate, review, all of the things that helps me continue to provide you with free, helpful education on my platform here. And otherwise, I'll catch you guys on the next episode or video. Thank you.